So, this has been in long delay for the last several months. Earlier this year, from April to June, all 8 Spider-Man movies were shown once a week on Monday nights, from Spider-Man 1 with Tobey Maguire all the way up to Spider-Man No Way Home with Tom Holland. Naturally, as a Spider-Man fan, how could I not see these films in a theatrical setting once again? Due to a soft but strong nudge from a friend of mine, I took it upon myself to complete all the rest of the movies, and it was a little hard to stomach through those rough spots, but we got to the very end, so it was all worth it. To see the first 2 Spider-Man films in a theatrical setting after 20 years, there's no other feeling like it. It was really neat to see it all in light of No Way Home, knowing where all these 3 characters' arcs turn up. I was able to look at the Amazing Spider-Man series somewhat differently in hindsight. My opinions on those 2 films haven't really changed much, but we're gonna get to that in a minute. Just a ground rule or 2 here for you guys. I'm not going to include any of the Sony spin-offs. Those movies I see as more of their own thing. But I am going to include the Spider-Verse movies, so don't you worry. I think those 2 definitely count. But in any case, let's start off from the bottom. Worst to best. Starting out at the bottom with Amazing Spider-Man 2. Yeah, where do I even begin with this one? Yes, I know that there are fans of this series out there, so if I upset any of you guys, I apologize. If you like this movie and its predecessor, more power to you. But to call this movie a jumbled mess is an understatement. Way too many characters, too many villains, too many plot points that don't really fully mesh together to create one coherent narrative. The portrayal of Electro is very cartoonish, very reminiscent of Jim Carrey's Riddler in Batman Forever. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Joel Schumacher, God rest his soul, walked onto the set and shot some of the scenes for this, because it literally feels like I was watching an alternative cut of Batman Forever. Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn / the Green Goblin. Ugh. I've seen Dane DeHaan in some other films like Oppenheimer or Lincoln, and in those cases I thought he did a fine job. It's not really the acting that I have a problem with, although that certainly doesn't help. But really what it comes down to is that the characterization or the character arc is so crammed and jumbled that we don't really get enough time to know him as a person. And on top of that, you literally shove him into the finale to kill Gwen Stacy. That's really the only reason he's in here. When it comes to the romance between Peter and Gwen, just about everybody considers this to be the saving grace of these 2 movies. I cannot tell you how strongly I disagree with that. I'm going to dive deeper into that in a separate video pretty soon. But bottom line is, all the back and forth wishy-washiness that Peter Parker experiences, that should he keep his promise to Captain Stacy, should he try to go back with her, him not wanting to be with her not wanting to be with him, and so on and so forth, it gets to a point where I say, can you please just make up your damn minds already? And not only that, she decides to put herself in a dangerous situation that gets her killed in the first place. I know a lot of people will say that they want to see a strong, independent woman make her own choices. I'm all for that, and that's not what I have a problem with. But my problem with it takes the responsibility off of his shoulders, whereas Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man feels the consequences of his actions with Uncle Ben. And even Tom Holland's Spider-Man, with his Aunt May being killed in No Way Home. We hear some mentions of it in No Way Home, that he did feel responsible and that he won't be able to forgive himself for Gwen's death. But on my end here, they did not pull it off. And as far as the portrayal of Spider-Man in this one from Andrew Garfield, this to me is not Peter Parker. This is like Andrew Garfield playing a variation of himself. Whereas in the first film, I felt like he was at least making an effort to play or try to be Peter Parker. He acts nothing like Peter Parker, and he comes off as more of a nuisance and a complete annoyance. Literally almost every line of dialogue out of his mouth is a stupid joke or a quip, and aside from the chimney gag, none of it works. Don't even get me started on the Oscorp conspiracy thing with Peter's parents. I don't even have the energy to go into that. As far as the colorful tone, it was nice to see Spider-Man in a colorful vibe again, but at times it just felt too much, whereas the previous film felt way too extreme in the other direction with its dark tone. If you want to go more serious, fine, or if you want to go more colorful, then that's fine too, but sometimes people can go too far in a few places. Again, if people like it, have at it, but for me, not so much. Number 9. The Amazing Spider-Man. This was the next Spider-Man movie we got after Spider-Man 3, when we were supposed to get a Spider-Man 4, but due to conflicts between Sam Raimi and the studio execs, they decided to retain the rights to the character and put out a new film in order to keep it from going back to Marvel Studios. The fact that they weren't doing the Raimi series anymore was a real bummer, but I decided on a whim to give it the benefit of the doubt, and at the time I did really like it, but over time it started to fade away and I realized, wait a minute, this movie isn't that good. In fact, I would go as far as to say that I kind of hated it at one point in time. Now it's not so much like that. To me, it just feels really hollow. It has no soul, save for a couple of moments at least. I feel like there is somewhat of an attempt on Mark Webb's part, the director, to put some kind of genuine heart into this movie. Unfortunately, due to the studio interference that was a lot more apparent in the following sequel, this movie was never really able to properly spread its wings. Dr. Connors, also known as the Lizard, is portrayed to be very sympathetic in other iterations of Spider-Man, but in this film, he is the worst developed and worst fleshed out villain in all 8 Spider-Man movies. Well, all 8 live-action Spider-Man films. In all 10 of them? Yeah. No character at all. It starts out somewhat promising due to his connection with Richard Parker, but all of the development that's later given to him is that he's trying to regrow his arm, and then out of nowhere he decides to turn everybody in New York City into a lizard creature to cure them. Where exactly did that come from? And I swear to God, if someone tells me that they explain it in the deleted scenes, I'm gonna lose my damn mind. If it's not in the movie, it doesn't count. All it really does is make me go, why the hell did you cut that out? That is one of, if not the biggest symptoms of the underlying problem that this movie's got. There's no singular vision that really separates it from the others. It's really just a repackage of the 2002 film that came out 10 years prior to this. It does play out differently from the first film, but the beats are more or less the same. I'm not against them going over those certain tropes again, but the way it comes off here, and I think it's a lot more apparent in the second film, they're trying, I think, as hard as they could to compensate and cater to the fans who didn't like the original 3 films. Using the web shooters by focusing on them for 10 seconds, not really showing us how Peter was able to make these things in the first place, and the amount of jokes that he throws in the car thief scene, that is not funny at all. Some people may find it that way. I don't. In fact, rewatching this, I wanted to smack him upside the head and say, dude, will you shut up? Yes, I know that's a key part of his character, that he's supposed to be snappy and witty and throwing all these quips and everything. If you make him too silly and stupid, then you take out the risk, or you take out the sense of threat that's supposed to be present there. In the comics, it's one thing, but in a feature film like this, after a while, it gets tiresome. Spider-Man, and especially Peter Parker, is not Wade Wilson. As far as the portrayal of Peter Parker, I like Andrew Garfield as an actor in other films, and I really liked him in No Way Home. I think in this film, he's trying his hardest to play Peter Parker, even though I don't really see him as Peter Parker. And the Peter and Gwen romance, like I said, I'll save that for another video, but everybody talks about how great their chemistry is. Yeah, they are cute together, but past that point, the romance itself is pretty boring. There's no development to it, and we don't really understand why Gwen Stacy loves Peter Parker all of a sudden. You could argue that, yeah, she was smitten by him because of how he was able to stand up to Flash Thompson, which, by the way, that should be a big warning sign, that if Peter Parker's already confident before he gets his powers, that shows me that you're not getting the material. Yeah, you could chalk it up to that reason, but besides that, we don't really get many scenes with them talking to each other. They don't really know each other very well. It's just them kind of brushing their noses together, looking at each other from a distance, and then by the time they get together, they actually start to talk to each other like they've been a couple for some time. Where was that before they made the big kiss with each other on the rooftop? I do really like Emma Stone, but Gwen Stacy in this film, along with its sequel, is just boring, flat, and dull. Not as far as the character personality goes, but as far as her development. I do like Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben and Sally Field as Aunt May, but they don't really have quite the same amount of gravitas and respect that Cliff Robertson and Rosemary Harris were able to convey. The score by James Horner is actually not that bad, nowhere near on the same level as Danny Elfman, but even then, that's a tough act to follow. The action sequences mostly are very flat, except for the crane sequence, which I think is spectacularly filmed. I like the scene where Peter Parker saves the boy on the bridge, and the Stan Lee cameo is hilarious. One of the best that he ever did. Oh, and Dennis Leary as Captain Stacy, he does have his moments. Yeah, this is not a horrible movie or anything. You could watch it and have some kind of fun with it. But for myself, it leaves a lot to be desired. It's just boring, bland, and has no soul. And again, if anyone likes this movie, more power to you. Number 8, Spider-Man Far From Home. Seeing it in theaters again for this special release was my second time seeing it. After its release in 2019, I had no desire to see it again. So I was curious to see how I would feel about this now, and it's alright. It's not great, but it's not awful either. The stakes of him stopping Mysterio are actually, I think, kind of fun and exciting at the finale, especially in how it leads to what transpires in No Way Home. Which actually, in between, I thought they were going to come up with some excuse to actually create some kind of fake out and say, oh, actually, he didn't reveal his identity, so he's all good. But no, they actually kept good on their promise. So knowing what happened in No Way Home helped somewhat soften the blow for me. It's just really kind of inconsequential, and there's really not much substance to this. Even with the previous film, Spider-Man Homecoming, I felt like there was a decent arc that Peter went through where he was trying to prove himself as an Avenger. In this one, what exactly is his deal? He wants to try to live a normal life, yeah, by going out on these trips for his school, and yet all these certain things keep getting in the way. It's really him developing this romance with Zendaya's MJ, which really came out of nowhere, and yeah, they have good chemistry, and it's certainly a lot more bearable than Peter and Gwen in the Amazing Spider-Man films were, but I don't really understand why Peter really likes this girl so much. I understand why she likes him. Besides that, what's there to get excited about? What exactly led to this romance in the first place? Oh yeah, and Aunt May's totally cool with Peter being Spider-Man, whereas I thought that there was going to be some kind of tension throughout the entire thing where she doesn't want her nephew to get hurt. I don't know about any of you guys, but if I was Spider-Man and my mom found out about it, I would be willing to bet there would be some kind of friction between the two of us for a while. She might be okay with it, but even then, that's a dangerous thing to do. I do like Marissa Tomei, and I actually met her at Comic-Con a couple of months ago in Philly. She's not bad in any of these movies that she's been in with Spider-Man, but really she's just there to be eye candy for actually every guy to ogle over the fact that she's so hot. From the moment she stepped into the scene in Civil War, Tony Stark was making all these remarks about how attractive she was. This has nothing to do with Marissa Tomei. It's the people who wrote the character, and I think it's actually kind of sexist, to be honest with you. We don't really get to know anything about her and how she's still reeling from the death of her husband with Uncle Ben, which I know none of these movies have ever mentioned Uncle Ben, the Tom Holland Spider-Man. I'm not asking for Uncle Ben's death to be shown again, but at least have some kind of acknowledgement of his impact on Peter Parker and Aunt May. If Robert Pattinson's Batman can get away with it with his parents, why can't they do that same thing here? As for the Mysterio plot, Jake Gyllenhaal is always fun in anything that he's in, and I was fine with him up until the big reveal where it turns out he's yet just another employee or somebody wronged by Tony Stark. I was fine with it with Michael Keaton's Vulture, but seeing it here again, I thought, really? Really? We're going back to that? Okay, yeah, he wants to prove that he is a really smart guy and a heroic figure. Besides that, what else does he have left to prove? We don't really get to know anything about that. But I'd be lying if I said those dream sequences or those alternate visions that he makes Peter experience didn't get me confused from time to time. It took me right back to seeing all the levels involving Mysterio in the Spider-Man 2 video game. And while I do really like Tom Holland as his current iteration of Spider-Man, Peter Parker does some things in this movie that leave me scratching my head. Like how he uses Tony Stark's glasses and accidentally causes a drone missile strike to go after the rival in school, almost cause a completely catastrophic event by accident. How stupid can this kid be? I'm not saying Peter Parker doesn't always make the best decisions, and he's certainly flawed in the way he deals with situations sometimes, but this to me I think was way too much of a leap. If anything, I would say Far From Home is pretty forgettable. Harmless fun, but could have been a lot better in so many ways. Really not much else to talk about. Number 7. Spider-Man 3. If you were to rewind back the clock to about a decade ago, almost everybody had nothing good to say about it. Now, practically everybody says that they love this. Spider-Man 3 is definitely a letdown, especially in comparison to what came before, with Spider-Man 1 and 2. Now, I do like seeing Peter Parker finally getting worshipped as a hero when he's Spider-Man. After all the stuff that he's been through in the previous 2 films, everybody is now finally appreciating him for what he does. Things seem to be going okay for him, until Harry Osborn comes onto the scene as the new Green Goblin, or the Goblin, or snowboarder. I don't really know what was going on there. Then Sandman comes onto the scene, and then Eddie Brock, or also known as Venom, comes in to put a foil into everything. All of this is just one big giant mess of a movie that is never able to really fully put itself together to give us a coherent narrative, just like Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now where I differ is that as opposed to that film, this one actually has a narrative through line of some kind, where it actually attempts to give us some kind of an arc for all of these characters, and there are development given to most of the characters in here. These people actually do feel like characters. As obnoxious and oblivious as Peter Parker comes off here, he does experience some form of an arc. I don't know how people feel about this now. Tobey Maguire is not the problem here. It's everything going on behind the scenes with the writers and the studio executives interfering. What really they wanted to see was Venom thrown into the mix, and Sam Raimi has said that he is not a fan of the character Venom. He wanted to go the old school way with the 60s and 70s Spider-Man villains, and when you throw Venom into the mix, which has an 80s, 90s edge, it doesn't fit. If you force someone to do something that they're not a fan of course it's gonna suck. And they do follow the basic formula of Eddie Brock being wronged by his rival Peter Parker, but it just feels so cluttered and never really gives us enough time to breathe. Topher Grace is Topher Grace. I didn't hate the idea of him being Eddie Brock, but all he really gets to do is just act like a variation of himself in here. Whereas if this was dragged out into 2 films, which I heard at one point in time they were considering doing something like that, we might have gotten a few scenes with him where we got to know him as a person. Same thing with Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin. The moment he loses his memory after his first fight with Peter, that's when the movie starts to go downhill for me. That being said, I really do like the penthouse fight that he has with Peter Parker when they taunt each other. How'd you like that, Spidey? That all you got? Oh, look at little Goblin Jr. You gonna cry? The emo Peter stuff is, yeah, very silly and unnecessary. The fact that it led to a big meme known as Bully Maguire, which we see in so many corners of the internet now, I don't know what else to say. Mary Jane in this film, I think, is actually probably the least likable out of all 3 movies. We at least understood why she was angry with Peter in the second film because he wasn't able to keep his promise that he would be there for her. All we really see is her getting jealous of the spotlight that he steals from her. She gets fired from her acting job when, as far as I'm concerned, she seemed to be doing just fine on stage, but then all the bad reviews come out and she's suddenly out of a job. I can easily understand and appreciate that they wanted to try something different with MJ getting beaten up by the world like Peter went through in the previous film, but with all the other stuff that's in the mix, it never really has enough time to breathe. And what really bothers me is that the fact that she dumps Peter for no reason at the park rather than try to warn him about Harry. Really, lady, come on. You couldn't at least have some kind of care to let him know what's going on? And what really gets me is that some people to this day laugh at how Peter cries over that. How would you feel if your girlfriend or boyfriend was dumping you for no reason?
That's not funny. That's not funny at all.
The worst offense, though, is not the emo Peter scenes. It's the fact that Sandman was Uncle Ben's killer, completely undermining all of the guilt and shame that Peter feels over Uncle Ben. If they were to make him the getaway driver that bailed out at the last second when he saw Dennis Carradine shoot Uncle Ben, I probably would have been okay with that. And yeah, Dennis Carradine was still responsible for Ben dying because he grabbed Flint Marco's arm, which caused him to shoot Uncle Ben by accident. But the fact that it was somebody else, that in my eyes is inexcusable, and it drives me nuts every time I try to watch the movie. But the scene where he tells Peter what happened that night, and Peter showing forgiveness to him, admittedly does bring a tear to my eye. And the ending scene, where we see Peter and MJ slowly dancing together, starting to rebuild the relationship, with the knowledge in mind that we learned from No Way Home that he and MJ were able to figure it out. That's everything. Spider-Man 3 is just okay. Not exactly a good movie, a huge letdown in so many aspects, but really, it's just alright. Reasonably fun, but an average movie at best. To be honest though, I would rather watch this over the Amazing Spider-Man films any day of the week. Number 6. Spider-Man Homecoming, the first solo Spider-Man film post-Civil War, where we see Tom Holland going on his own as Spider-Man, fighting a new threat that's popped up on the scene of Queens, trying to prove himself as an Avenger to Tony Stark, who could possibly recruit him into the Avengers. Watching it again now, I would say it's actually a pretty fun movie, although it really does lack a lot of the emotional weight that I would like to see in a Spider-Man movie. Now, I'm not expecting Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 all the time, but some emotional gravitas wouldn't hurt anybody. The stakes really at the end of the day are, is Spider-Man going to get home in time, or is he going to be able to beat this guy so he can help Aunt May pay his rent or make it to his date or his class on time? They do have some of that in here, but it feels kind of inconsequential. A lot of the focus is on Peter Parker wanting to become an Avenger. Naturally, as a kid who looks up to these guys in his everyday life, who could blame him? And Tom Holland is really a lot of fun in this one. And I really love seeing how he's able to figure out the Stark prototype suit that was given to him. Instant kill mode activated. No, I don't want to kill anybody. Other problems I had are still present, like with Aunt May being treated as a sex object or eye candy. Not objectified like you would see in a Michael Bay film, but the fact that everybody just ogles over her and we don't really know much about her as a character, that was, I think, a huge missed opportunity. And I think they could have had something there where this is a very caring type of mother figure that Peter has to look up to. And there is slightly an over-reliance on comedy to the point where I think it's really obnoxious. The MCU is no stranger to using humor most of the time, but in this case, with the enhanced interrogation mode, that's slightly too much. Although I do really love this following part right here.
You gotta get better at this part of the job.
I don't understand. I'm intimidating.
No, you're not.
But really the strongest point is not only Peter trying to prove himself as an Avenger, but when he finds out that Adrian Toomes is Liz Allen's father. In fact, the first time I saw this, I remember being completely blown away and caught off guard. When my mom and I saw it, and then when my friend and I saw it at the time, I felt what Peter felt in that moment. What? Oh, and the scene where he lifts up the rubble off of him, that to me screams Spider-Man in so many ways. Underneath that red and blue costume, what really matters is the heart of this character, his determination, his strong will to go forward. In the end, I would say Homecoming was a fairly good step back in the right direction. I think it's what Spider-Man needed at the time. After all this stuff with Spider-Man 3 and the Amazing Spider-Man films, Homecoming, along with his special appearance in Civil War, was a good way to get people interested in the character again. And we'll get to it later, but it did eventually lead to the greatness of No Way Home. So it definitely served its purpose. Numbers 4 and 5, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse. Yes, I am combining these two together because, to be honest, I think they equal each other. Into the Spider-Verse was a huge surprise, and another way to get people into the idea of Miles Morales, besides the Insomniac Spider-Man video games. Anything good that I could say about these two films has already been said, but the animation style is a gorgeous treat for the eyes. The musical score and the soundtrack, the characterizations and the portrayals of Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, Jake Johnson as the older Peter Parker, Miles Morales coming into his own by taking a leap of faith to become his own Spider-Man, and the cliffhanger that Across the Spider-Verse ends with. Oh man, I still remember this. It was over a year ago. Once I realized that it was ending and everybody was rounding up, I thought, you're kidding me. You're kidding me. You're gonna end this right now? And of course they ended it with to be continued, so I thought, okay, there's definitely going to be a sequel, but how long do we have to wait for this? I could go on and on about these two movies, but there's really so many details to cover that it's going to take me at least 5 hours to do so. Yeah, but the Spider-Verse movies, solid gold. Number 3. Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie was very, very special for me in so many ways. I'll keep some of the details to myself, but 2021 was a really strange year for me. Certain connections that I experienced that didn't exactly go the way I was hoping, and me being a very sensitive person, it was a lot for me to take in. And the hype train with No Way Home was starting to ramp up as the year came to a close. I was really riding on this one to give me something positive to go on, especially with the idea of Tobey Maguire returning as his version of Spider-Man. Not only with Peter being watched closely by the world with The Secret out, Alfred Molina was returning as Doc Ock, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and other villains that made appearances in the other movies. Us Spider-Man fans started to get the feeling that something was happening here, and I have not screamed so hard with joy since then. Deadpool and Wolverine didn't come even close to that. In fact, rewatching this movie in theaters with a nearly full crowd, Andrew walked in, people got excited and some clapped, but when Tobey walked in, the entire room erupted. What's that tell you guys? What's that tell you? Seeing the appearances of Tobey and Andrew and all the other villains from the previous movies, that's just really good icing on top of a very well-made cake. There's been some pushback on Spider-Man No Way Home that it's all just nostalgia bait and really not much else. Certain YouTubers that I've watched, I'm not going to mention by name here, say that the setup isn't quite as good and that the Flash is a lot better in comparison. I beg to differ on that one. I think it starts out fairly good because Peter is actually starting to face the consequences of his actions, which is what I've been wanting to see in the previous two films. All the stuff that happened with him and Mysterio is now caught up with him, and he can't get away from it no matter how hard he tries. But then once he messes up the spell that he asked Doctor Strange to do for him, and all the villains start to come in, then the movie gets really good. And then Tobey and Andrew show up, it gets even better. And the cast have said this in their own various ways. This is Tom Holland's Spider-Man's origin story, him becoming the classic Spider-Man that we all know and love. Tobey and Andrew's appearances in here complement Tom Holland's journey because they help save his soul from going down a very dark path, and they also experience their own sense of healing. Peter 3 is able to heal from the guilt over Gwen by saving MJ, and Peter 2 was able to do the same thing by stopping Peter 1 from killing Norman, something that he had been thinking about for years. And the tragic thing about all of this, and a very noble thing, is that he decides to go through with the spell as originally intended in order to stop all of reality from collapsing. Now he's on his own and has nobody left to turn to. But yet he's going to carry on anyway and be the hero that New York needs. Based on recent reports that we've heard about Spider-Man 4, I really hope that they find some way to include that aspect and carry that on. As of yet, it doesn't sound too promising, but we'll see how it goes. The best scenes as far as I'm concerned, the rooftop scene where all three Spider-Men meet, and Tobey Maguire stopping Tom from killing the Green Goblin. Everybody talks about Peter 3 saving MJ, but for me, I think Peter 2 stopping Peter 1 is even better. Yeah, go ahead, come at me. And one last thing, Andrew Garfield feels more like Spider-Man in this movie than his own 2 solo films. With Marvel behind the wheel, that should tell you something. Number 2. This was a tough one because I debated about whether or not I should include one over the other with my favorite or the best. For me, it's the first Spider-Man movie at number 2. I'm not really going to tell you anything that you don't already know. This is my favorite movie of all time. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this was my Star Wars. Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker is my Luke Skywalker. And as much as I like Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire's genuine portrayal of the character, I think still makes him the best actor to play Spider-Man. Everybody talks about how he doesn't have enough jokes, that he's not confident enough, but really what this movie and its sequel excel at with his portrayal is the heart of the character, the kindness and care that he exhibits towards other people. To me, that's a lot more important than being snappy and witty. Those are bonuses, yes, but that's not what makes the character click. A lot that I could cover with Spider-Man 1, but all the iconic poses, such as the upside-down kiss, Willem Dafoe's portrayal of the Green Goblin, Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility, J.K. Simmons as Jonah Jameson, the greatest casting in the world. Why else bring him back into the MCU as the same character? And the romance between Peter and MJ, I think, is so well developed and properly developed as opposed to Peter and Gwen. MJ sees that Peter is the actual opposite of her father, Flash, and Harry, that we understand why she falls in love with him in the first place. He's always there for her and is always someone willing to listen to her. James Franco's Harry Osborn and the inevitable rivalry and tension that develops among the three, even with Spider-Man 3 turning out the way it did, I still like seeing the beginning stages of all that. Oh, and the mirror scene where Norman's talking to himself. I love that scene so much. Godspeed, Spider-Man. And all the signature things that Sam Raimi throws in here, from the horror imagery, with the Green Goblin especially, Danny Elfman's incredible score, which to this day is still iconic. The Goblin suit, yeah, it's very silly looking, but at certain moments, it does make you jump out of your skin. Oh, and the post 9/11 imagery, which people have negatively talked about, I don't really think it's a problem anymore. I've already talked about it, so if you want to know, you can check out the video somewhere on my channel. I'll put the link in the description for you. 35 years from now, when I'm in my 60s, I'll still sit there and have so much joy watching this. Some people will write me off as a Spider-Man Tobey Maguire nut. Well, I don't know if that title qualifies, but hey, I'll take it. Even when I go onto the other side, I'm still gonna watch the hell out of this movie. Even if it drives God crazy, I don't care. And finally, with number 1, Spider-Man 2, the crown jewel of all comic book movies. This is the prime example of how to make a good comic book movie, with a really deep emotional focus on the titular character, a villain whose motivations are equally as compelling even though we understand that it's wrong. And as I mentioned just now, Roger Ebert at the time of this film's release, what really makes this film unique is that it gives full attention to the dilemma of Peter Parker. Except for the animated films and maybe to a degree No Way Home, none of the other films have come close to that. I think this is Tobey Maguire's best outing as the character. In fact, one of the best acting performances that he's ever given. Watch the scene where he confesses what happened the night Uncle Ben died, and tell me that I'm wrong. In fact, the editor of this film chose for the most part to not cut away from Tobey Maguire's performance because of how good he was. That should tell you something. I love seeing the decline of Harry Osborn becoming the new Green Goblin, refusing to change at every chance that he gets. Mary Jane becoming increasingly frustrated with Peter, although starting to wonder deep down if he really is Spider-Man. Aunt May's words of wisdom about there's a hero in all of us, beautifully conveyed by Alvin Sargent and the other writers in this film, and with Rosemary Harris's great performance. And not to mention Alfred Molina's portrayal of Doc Ock. Really not much else I could say about him, just watch the film for yourself. From an acting performance standpoint, I kind of prefer Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, but from a character standpoint, I think Otto has the slight edge. Just slightly. And despite his villainous status, he refuses to die a monster. And the action sequences with the train and the bank heist, absolute perfection. Could have done without the hospital scene because tonally I think it feels out of place with the rest of the movie, and I think they could have used more screen time with John Jameson, whereas I think he actually should have been the main villain in Spider-Man 3 instead. But even so, Spider-Man 2, it may not be exactly a perfect movie when you really boil down to it, but it was perfect for me. I think it remains the best comic book film in the whole genre, and I will die on that hill. So that's my ranking of the Spider-Man movies. Thank you guys so much for watching. How do you rank the Spider-Man movies? Comment below and tell me what they are, and if you feel differently than I do, which I know some of you probably will, let's just try to keep it civil, because like with the Star Wars fandom and the Marvel fan base as of late, it can get a little heated depending on who you talk to. But either way, let's have some fun here. And I think with the Spider-Man franchise, this for me was long overdue. Thanks again, guys. Stay tuned for more content coming up soon, and I'll see you in the next one.